Welcome to Meet the Press Now. We begin with breaking news from Wall Street as stocks tumbled more than 1,000 points today after a worse-than-expected inflation report showed prices for key goods, including food and housing, are still soaring for millions of Americans. And you see there, that's the view from the New York Stock Exchange. The Dow Jones has closed the day down nearly 1,300 points in all, making it the worst day of the year for the stock market. And it comes as President Biden is hosting an event at the White House to celebrate part of the administration's response to rising prices. We will have much more on all of that in just a moment, but we do want to begin with this breaking news. And NBC News senior business correspondent Stephanie Ruhle to help us break down what we are witnessing. So walk us through what happened today, Steph, and how significant is this moment?
Well, we got this inflation report, and while there's very good news, you're seeing gas prices go down. That helps everyday Americans, not just in the day-to-day, but from a sentiment perspective, how you feel about the economy. But despite the fact that the Fed has taken pretty aggressive efforts to raise rates to slow the economy, we're not seeing it slow as quickly as they thought it would. Rent is still very high. Healthcare costs are very high. And when you go to the grocery store, almost everything you buy costs a whole lot of money. Now, can the Fed do much about that, or the administration? Not thus far. Remember, we get so much of our food products from overseas, whether you're dealing with droughts here in California, the situation in Ukraine where we get wheat from. These are all complicated factors. And then you turn to the markets and say, hold on a second. Why are they going down that much? Remember, the Fed now sees they likely have to raise rates again, and that is tough for public companies because that means it will be more expensive for companies to borrow. If it's more expensive for them to borrow and operate, that means their margins will shrink, and we could end up seeing things like layoffs come in the coming months. So for the Fed, this is very, very tricky. They're threading this needle. How do I slow the economy and lower prices while at the same time not tip us into recession? That's the balancing act, and that's the negative response you've seen from Wall Street today.
Well, and Steph, you talk about the fact that the Fed has to thread that needle, and all eyes will be on the Fed next week when we anticipate they could raise rates yet again. How high are you expecting them to potentially raise rates, particularly against the backdrop of this new report?
It could be 3/4 of a point. It could be a full point, and it's really tricky because in raising rates to slow the economy, it makes day-to-day life more expensive. So it is a move for a long-term solution that causes short-term pain.
Steph, really quickly before I let you go, there's obviously been so much discussion about when inflation will peak. At the beginning of this, we heard, of course, the president, the Biden administration say that they thought this would be temporary. Now that's clearly not the case. Do we have any sense of when these prices will start to come down and come down for good?
Listen, they are not going up at the rate they once were, so things are slowing. The bigger issue now isn't, oh my gosh, prices are going so much higher so fast. The bigger issue is, hold on a second, we thought they would drop quicker. And that's what has Wall Street analysts as well as the Fed saying, I thought this was going to work at least quicker, and it hasn't. And that's why there's a bit of a pause today.
Really important distinction there, Stephanie. We will, of course, continue to watch everything you have to say and report on all of this. Really appreciate your joining us at the top for the breaking news. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And as we mentioned, President Biden is speaking at the White House alongside members of Congress, governors, mayors, activists, and union workers to celebrate the administration's work fighting inflation. You're looking at live pictures of the president speaking right now. This celebratory event comes on the heels of that worse-than-expected inflation report that we were just talking about with Steph, showing that food and housing costs are still soaring for millions of Americans, which could, of course, complicate Democrats' efforts to try to neutralize this as Republicans' attacks on the issue of the economy ahead of the midterms. Consumer prices rose 0.1 percentage point from July to August, putting the year-over-year increase at 8.3%. That's higher than analysts initially predicted. Even though energy prices have started to ease, the cost of food and housing are still red hot. Food prices are rising at the fastest pace in more than 40 years. Rent had its largest increase since 1986. Health insurance prices saw their biggest increase on record. The rise in those prices all but canceled out any relief Americans are seeing at the pump, where gas prices have fallen roughly $1.30 in recent weeks. NBC's Monica Alba is covering the president's remarks. NBC's Shaq Brewster is at a grocery store in Chicago talking to people about how this is impacting them. And also with us is Omar Sharif, founder and president of Inflation Insights. Thanks so much to all of you for being here. Monica, I have to start with you. The fact that we have been watching, we've all been reporting on President Biden at the White House holding this celebratory event to tout the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act. No doubt it's a win for Democrats and for this president, but the timing of it, did it come off as strained given these new numbers, Mon?
And it's the White House calling it a celebration, Kristen. That is how they frame this event. They have hundreds of lawmakers in attendance and people who they say will benefit from this legislation. And it's not like this is a bill signing. That has already happened. This is the president and the White House wanting to take a victory lap on something that they rebranded as the Inflation Reduction Act, with some experts weighing in on just how much that could reduce inflation is an open question that I will let others speak to in their expertise a little bit more. But you do have this dissonance a little bit with the news coming out today. And the White House is saying, look, this is something that is still going to bring a lot of relief to Americans in a different way when they talk about the lowering of prescription drugs for some, when they talk about some other angles. But there was a little bit of pressure and criticism asking today. The White House press secretary had to field questions about covering food and housing costs, what you were just talking about. How will the Inflation Reduction Act help with that? And she said, listen, this isn't so much about celebrating, even though, again, it's the White House calling this a celebration of the IRA, but about trying to mark the progress that has been made so far, and they hope there will be more of it. But it's the president who has constantly said when it comes to this recovering economy and inflation that it's not going to happen overnight. But the White House was hoping, I think, for some better numbers here, and they acknowledge that there is a little more pain. But the one thing they keep pointing to over and over again is those gas prices coming down steadily in recent weeks. That's something that they talk about all the time, and they are trying to put that in the context and conversation here as well, Kristen.
Yeah, Monica, I think you're absolutely right. They are trying to put the focus on those gas prices, which are coming down. And of course, the big challenge with IRA is the impact that it will have could be over time and not immediate. Monica Alba, thank you so much for that great reporting. We really appreciate it. Shaq Brewster, let me turn to you. You have been talking to people there in Chicago about how this is impacting them, how this is impacting their ability to balance their budget month to month. So what is the latest reaction to this inflation report when you have a jump of about 10% increase in prices across the board since last year?
Look, folks say it continues to be hard, and you mentioned that 10% increase when you look at things across the board. But when you dig into this report and look at the cost of food, that is superseding what you're seeing with overall inflation. Now, while there was some potentially good news in that the increase in prices has slowed a bit, it's at the slowest increase since December, I'm still using the word increase. That means the costs are still going up. Those grocery bills are getting higher. So what that means is many consumers are starting to resort to options that economists and financial experts say is not the best option, but is providing some relief. Those buy now, pay later programs. I don't know if you bought a concert ticket recently or maybe a new pair of shoes or something like that, but you see online, it's the option where instead of paying all in one payment, you can break it out over 4 payments. Well, people are doing that with grocery bills. And that's something that you're seeing increasingly. Again, financial experts warning that is not the option, that there are bigger implications for that as we continue to watch that play out. But when you talk to families, they're saying it's giving them some relief now, and it's helping them spread out the high grocery bills over a couple of paychecks.
Well, and Shaq, it's so interesting to hear. And of course, food, you talked about food and housing really driving the increase in these prices that we're seeing. Are people telling you how they are adapting, how they're making this work for them?
You're hearing a lot of people are adjusting. Like, this is an expense that is non-discretionary. They have to pay for food. So some people are going to different brands of foods, the cheaper brands that they can afford. Some are going and doing smaller meals, for example, eating out less. So the impact that this can have is still there. And, you know, one thing that we're also hearing is, especially in terms of how many people have been using those buy now, pay later programs, those are things that allow you to not to pay an interest rate and had some flexible repayment options. Many of those people used those programs as the price of gas was increasing. So that is something that has since fallen. So they're not leaning on them as much as they have been before. So there's some extra room in their budgets. But with the price of food still increasing, they're still making those adjustments every time they walk in to one of those grocery stores.
Yeah, and creating a stressful situation for people all across this country. Shaq, thanks so much. Omar, I want to turn to you on this. Can you just respond for us to this breaking news? The stock market having its worst day this year, and then consumer prices unexpectedly rising 0.1% in August. Economists were hoping that those numbers would be coming down instead of going up. So how big of a setback is today?
Yeah, thank you, first of all, for having me. Yeah, it's certainly a setback. You know, just as last month, the numbers came off quite a bit, and I think everyone was quite ecstatic that maybe the Fed would only have to raise rates by 50 basis points. I think today shows that we're not out of the woods yet in terms of where inflation is headed, and so the Fed is going to continue to probably go 75 basis points next week. And I think part of the market reaction you're seeing, if you kind of think back to June and July, there was a lot of concern about recession. That concern emanated from the fact that folks thought that the Fed would do too much and push the economy into a recession. And I think what you're seeing today reflects that same sentiment from earlier in the summer that, hey, if they go 75, if they go 100, if they continue to do more, they're going to push us into a recession. I think that's really what the market's trying to tell you today.
Can you put that type of an increase into context, what you are expecting to see next week? Just how large of an increase would that be from the perspective of the Fed? These are not incremental increases we're seeing. I mean, by all accounts, they're being pretty aggressive.
Yeah, I mean, look, we haven't done 375 basis point hikes in a row since, I believe, 1981. So that kind of gives you some sense of, how long it's been since the Fed has had to act this aggressively, this quickly in such a short time frame. And so, that's kind of the concern is the Fed wants to front load this, by the way. They want to try to get to a rate that they believe is going to be a little bit restrictive, restrict demand a little bit, hopefully bring inflation down. And then they want to sit there for some time, as they've said, and see how the economy reacts to some of these rate hikes. And they're hoping really that it helps to bring inflation down moving forward.
And there, as I was just talking about with Steph, there has been all of this debate about when inflation will peak. We thought maybe last month we were starting to see signs that it could be inching in that direction. What is your take on this debate, Omar? How close is inflation to peaking, or are we far from having that happen?
Yeah, so there's two numbers that we look at. One is, just the headline inflation number. And here, as you mentioned, it was 8.3 today. We've come off a little bit from just sort of a 9 handle, but the really tricky thing was that you think about energy prices, incredibly volatile. You mentioned, Stephanie mentioned food prices and what's happening in Ukraine. All of these factors that the Fed cannot impact could affect that headline inflation rate moving forward. So I think it's too early to call a peak there. But we also look at the core inflation, excluding food and energy, simply because it's usually a better indicator of where inflation is going down the road. And there, I think we probably have another month of increase, maybe up to 6.4, 6.5 next month. After that, I think we should start to come off to probably a 5 handle by the end of this year.
Are there more things you think? Obviously, as we said, President Biden is touting the fact that he passed the Inflation Reduction Act, and while that will do things like start to bring down the prices of prescription drugs, a number of the things that it would do would happen over time. Are there things that the administration can do right now to address these stubborn figures as it relates to inflation, or is this really in the Fed's hands? What's your take on that?
If you're talking about the administration, I think there's only really two things they can try and do. One is try to advocate for policies that are going to increase housing. I mean, we talked about rent, the highest increase since 1996. We need more supply of housing. Whatever they can do to push that forward would be a big help. The second really direct impact they can have is on healthcare. If you think about the healthcare system, about 30% of it is, Medicare, roughly another 15-20% is Medicaid. The federal government those prices are what we call administered prices. So the government effectively is in control of a lot of that. And by slowing the growth rate of Medicare, through slowing reimbursements, they can have a bit of an impact on healthcare inflation. So those are the two policy areas I would point to most directly where they could have a bit more of an immediate effect, at least on the healthcare side. Housing obviously is going to take some time, but those are areas where I would focus on.
All right, Omar Sharif, thank you so much for joining us today and for your insights. We really appreciate it. And Monica and Shaq before that. Coming up, roughly 40 subpoenas in 1 week. The dramatic escalation in the Justice Department's criminal inquiry surrounding former President Trump and his legal team's efforts to overturn the 2020 election results. Plus, abortion bans and midterm politics. Democrats look to battleground Michigan, where abortion access is on the ballot, as Republicans in Washington weigh a new effort in the Senate to impose a federal ban. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. We have a sense today of when the January 6th committee will hold its next hearing. Committee Chairman Benny Thompson says his goal is to have that hearing on September 28th. That's 2 weeks from tomorrow.
Well, we're looking at whether or not we'll do another hearing. We're looking at the process of beginning to look at the report and what that should entail, as well as closing the loop on any potential witnesses.
Are you circling in on a date for that next hearing? Is September 28th an option you're throwing around?
Well, that's the goal at this point.
That date, September 28th?
That's correct.
All right, well, stay tuned for that. Meanwhile, sources tell NBC News the Justice Department has issued about 40 subpoenas in the last week related to the actions of former President Trump and his allies to overturn the 2020 election. Those sources say the DOJ also seized 2 phones. And just minutes ago, federal prosecutors unsealed new sections from that redacted version of the affidavit that the Justice Department used to support its Mar-a-Lago search warrant. For more, I'm joined by NBC News Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Delaney and NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard. Thanks so much to both of you for being here. So, Ken, let's get right to this breaking news. What more are we learning based on these newly unsealed portions of the affidavit?
Hey, Kristen, we're not actually learning that much more. Most of what we're seeing here has already been released. This was a portion of the affidavit that had to get approval from a separate judge because it contained grand jury information, which is secret by law unless a judge allows it to be released. And so we're seeing portions that relate to the exchanges that the DOJ had with the Trump team back in May and June that resulted in, well, first the DOJ handed them a grand jury subpoena and the Trump team handed over boxes of documents, including some marked at different levels of classification. And also, if you recall, the custodian of records, which we believe is a Trump lawyer, signed a document saying that they had conducted a diligent search of the premises and that there were no longer any classified documents left there at Mar-a-Lago, which obviously turned out not to be true. But that's sort of what's being recounted here. But as I said, most of this we already knew.
All right. Well, we appreciate your breaking down all of that for us, Ken. Let's turn now to these subpoenas, roughly 40 subpoenas based on sources you were talking to, handed out within Trump world. What does the timing of this tell you about potentially how far along the investigation may be into all of this, Ken?
Now, that's an interesting question and a tough one to discern, Kristen, because these appear to be quite broad, these subpoenas. One lawyer told me it was asking for anything and everyone having to do with the Trump campaign. And this is a really big expansion, it appears, of the Justice Department effort to get to the bottom of how the Trump team and various associates were working to overturn the election. We're raising money to do that. That's a new element. They're looking at this PAC called the Save America PAC that was operated by some people around Trump. But it's not clear how far along they are. It appears that in many ways they are at least at the middle stages, throwing out subpoenas to many, many people, trying to get bits and pieces of information. In 2 cases, we know of search warrants were served, including on Trump insider Boris Epstein, to seize their phone. So that required probable cause before a judge. But what's interesting to me is this is right on the edge of the 60-day period after which the DOJ usually doesn't take action that in a politically sensitive case close to the midterm election, Kristen.
Well, let me follow up with you quickly before we get to Vaughn. What does that mean in terms of whether or not charges could actually be filed, given that we're bumping right up against that deadline?
It suggests that we would not see charges between now and the election, but I don't think you can rule anything out. Trump is not on the ballot here, and this is not a hard and fast rule. It's kind of a tradition at the DOJ, and there are exceptions to it. If they feel like there's some important things that they need to do or some charges that need to be filed, it's possible they could do it. But I think, given past practice, it would be unlikely, Kristen.
All right. Vaughn, I know you've been working your phones and talking to your sources as well. What has the reaction been from inside Trump world to these subpoenas?
You know, the Trump allies continue to push back that this is politically motivated. As Ken just outlined, the fact that we are less than 60 days until these midterm elections, they are using, in order to galvanize, their own forces, the suggestion that this is a political operation that was meant to undermine Republican efforts here. And I think it's important to note that they are using the timeline of not only the DOJ subpoenas here, but also the fact that there was interest in knowledge that these documents existed at Mar-a-Lago dating back earlier this year. And if it was of paramount concern, whether it be these documents or other issues related to efforts to subvert the 2020 election, that this is now an investigation that is coincidentally run up to right before the midterm elections, a year and a half, almost 2 years after the 2020 election. At the same time, it's also important to note here when you're looking at these investigations is to what extent has the DOJ made progress. A lot of these subpoenas are coming down to individuals who were first subpoenaed by the January 6th committee a year ago this month. And so that is where now this question is unfolding as to what information would the January 6th Select Committee turn over to the DOJ to help further its investigations.
I think that's an important link to make. Vaughn, I have to ask you about this other thing that is gaining headlines, getting attention today. Former President Trump retruthed basically an image of himself. He's wearing a QAnon lapel pin, in which included a QAnon slogan. What has the reaction been to this? What are you hearing about what may have prompted this, Vaughn?
When we're talking about the president and his allies' response, we have to start with the former president himself. He is his own spokesman. And on this Truth Social account, he has been reposting content throughout the day here. But the one that you just outlined it uses the phrase, "the storm is coming." And now, for those who follow QAnon, the storm is when Donald Trump at the helm would lead what would amount to a mass arrest of Democrats and others who are part of the deep state. Of course, Donald Trump, over the course of his presidency, never linked arms directly with QAnon. But this here today in this post is him playing into the conspiracy theories that so many in this country have wandered into and into dangerous territory. I mean, we're talking about labeling Democrats and others in the government as being pedophiles or satanic. It's dangerous, quite frankly, Kristen, and the former president is now directly playing to the subsect of the American population that has gone down a dark tunnel of these conspiracy theories as these investigations mount and grow closer to him.
And meanwhile, Ken, Vaughn has been tracking everything that's going on inside Trump world in terms of the legal debate over whether or not there will or will not be a special master. Notably, DOJ filed papers late yesterday that suggested it would actually accept one of the Trump team's picks for a special master. What can you tell us about that? What does it mean, given that there's been all of this litigation back and forth?
So interesting, isn't it? A moment of agreement. Judge Raymond Dearie is a senior judge in the Eastern District of New York, 78 years old, and also a former judge on the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. So he's used to dealing with classified information. Both sides agree. He was a Trump proposal, came from the Trump side, but both sides agree he would be suitable to be the special master. He's got a staff that he can call on to help him. So we'll see if the judge takes them up on that, but that's where it stands right now. Unclear why they both agree, but in this case they do, Kristen.
All right. Stranger things have happened, I guess. Ken and Vaughn, thank you for all of that reporting on all of these developments inside Trump world. We really appreciate it. Coming up next, a recent court decision puts abortion access on the ballot in Michigan. I'm going to talk to the battleground state's Attorney General, Dana Nessel, about the legal and political fights ahead as she fights for her own re-election. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham announced plans to introduce national abortion legislation to the Senate this morning, aiming to pass a bill that would restrict access to abortion after 15 weeks of pregnancy across the country. The bill has exceptions for rape, incest, and threats to the life and health of the mother. But if passed, it would allow for states to invoke their own more restrictive laws on top of the national baseline. Graham's plan breaks from the strategy of many Republicans right now, including Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, as party leadership tries to move the national conversation away from the hot-button issue of abortion. Meanwhile, Democrats in key midterm states want voters engaged on the issue, pushing for voters to be able to weigh in directly on abortion through ballot initiatives. Voters will get to decide on one such ballot initiative in Michigan after that state's Supreme Court ruled in favor of adding it to the ballot just last week. Now, that decision came just a day after a different court struck down the state's restrictive abortion trigger law. I'm joined now by Michigan's Attorney General Dana Nessel to discuss all of this. Attorney General Nessel, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
I do want to start by just getting your reaction to Senator Graham's abortion bill. What do you think it would mean to have a national 15-week ban? What would it mean specifically for Michigan?
Well, I mean, I can hardly say that I'm surprised, because we knew that this is what the Republicans' goal was all along. You know, for so long, we've heard that, you know, states are the laboratories of democracy and the state should get to make these decisions. And that's why we shouldn't have, you know, the Supreme Court have this ruling in place that's held for so many years, so many decades, because the state should individually be able to decide. But now we know that they didn't really want us to decide in the first place ever, right? Despite the fact that, you know, the legality of abortion rights is enormously popular in red states and blue. But essentially what it would mean if such a law were to pass, and let's be very clear, I mean, you'd have to flip both the House, the Senate, and the presidency in order for this to happen, because there's no way this is going to happen with with Democrats in power. What it would mean is for states like mine, once again, we would be subject to the arbitrary whims of those who are not truly representative of what the people want. And so, you know, if the Republicans end up becoming in the majority again nationally, I think we're in real trouble in states like mine and in states all around the country. Obviously,
what's notable. Yeah, what's notable is that there were some wins for abortion rights activists in your state last week. As I kind of mapped out at the top, you had the Supreme Court ruling to put that abortion referendum on the ballot, and another that struck down the restrictive abortion law back from 1931. But I guess as you watch those two developments, how tenuous do you think they are, and what would need to happen for them to actually be solidified?
You know, I have every confidence in the world that our ballot proposal will pass. And so here in the state of Michigan, we, you know, will be able to ensure that women have the right to bodily autonomy, bodily integrity, that we have, you know, equal protection under the law. But obviously, if that passes nationally, then it won't really matter what our state constitution says, because federal law will trump the state constitution. So I think people need to be very careful about who they elect, not just for their state legislators, not just for their state Supreme Courts, not just what they put on as a ballot proposal in their individual state, but they have to be very careful about who they are voting for Congress, for United States Senator, for U.S. House of Representative. It's incredibly important to know what their position is on this particular issue, because it might absolutely, you know, eviscerate any efforts that we're making on a statewide level.
And Attorney General Nessel, I wonder, you know, you saw what happened in Kansas on the issue of abortion when abortion was quite literally on the ballot. What do you think the impact of having abortion on the ballot will mean for turnout in your state in November? And what do you think it'll mean for candidates who support abortion rights?
Well, you know, there was an important reason why the two Republicans on the State Board of Canvassers in Michigan wanted to keep this ballot proposal, the Reproductive Freedom for All ballot proposal, off the ballot. And it was simply because they knew it would generate turnout. And that once people were coming to the polls to vote for this ballot proposal for reproductive freedom, they weren't also going to vote for anti-choice candidates. And it's sort of ironic because the Republican nominee for governor said, great, you can come and vote for this, but while you're there, also vote for me, one of the most anti-choice candidates we've ever had on the ballot for governor in our state. And of course, everybody sort of mocked her for that, because why would you, if you're coming to support reproductive freedom and abortion rights, why would you vote for an anti-choice governor? Hopefully you wouldn't. But I think it's the recognition that there's going to be, dramatically increased turnout in our state, we hope, and we expect to see in Michigan because of this one proposal. And while they're there, they're going to vote for other candidates all the way up and down the ballot.
And obviously, the big battle will be for control of Congress in November. And Democrats are trying to, if not directly put this on the ballot in individual states, they are trying to make this the centerpiece of a number of races all across the country. On the other hand, you have Republicans who are putting the focus on the economy, on inflation. More tough numbers today. Do you think that the issue of abortion will supersede all other issues? I shouldn't say all other issues, but how motivating of a factor do you think it will be as Democrats try to hold on to power?
Well, I'm certainly not minimizing the impact that inflation, that the cost of food, that the cost of gas, that all of those things obviously have a very significant impact on an individual or on a family. But losing your right to reproductive freedom, I mean, once that's gone, it's gone. And, prices will go up and prices will go down, but your freedom to decide, when or if to reproduce, I mean, what is more major in a person's life? And the other thing that I find ironic is here the Republicans, they'll complain about inflation, but then they want to force people to have children who they cannot afford to support. So it seems to me a little contradictory, quite honestly.
All right. Well, Attorney General Dana Nessel, thank you so much for joining us to give us your perspective on all of this. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And if it's Tuesday, it's the final primary night of the 2022 midterms as voters head to the polls in New Hampshire, Delaware, and Rhode Island. What we're watching for tonight and what it could mean for November. Next, you're watching Meet the Press Now. Stay with us. Welcome back. Well, this is the last time until election night in November that we get to say, if it's Tuesday, voters are voting somewhere. And today that somewhere is Delaware, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire. And the Republican Senate primary in the Granite State is the one we are watching most closely because it will fill in the last blank on our battleground slate. Retired Brigadier General Don Bolduc and State Senator Chuck Morse are the top contenders for the Republican nomination to take on Democratic Senator Maggie Hassan. As we mentioned yesterday, Morse has the backing of the traditional apparatus in New Hampshire, while Bolduc has taken positions more closely in line with former President Trump. Now, once we have a winner in New Hampshire, the general election season will truly be underway, with candidates across the country facing each other, and issues like the economy, abortion, and threats to democracy will be front and center. I'm joined now by my panel, columnist for the Washington Post and NBC News political analyst Eugene Robinson, and editor at Commentary Magazine, John Podhoretz. Thanks so much to both of you for being here. I really appreciate it. John, let me start with you. Let's talk about New Hampshire. You have Governor Sununu, who signaled today that he'd be willing to get behind Don Bolduc, actually, if he wins the primary. Sununu initially was calling him a conspiracy theorist, an extremist. So how does he make that shift, and will it be viewed as legitimate if, in fact, you do have Bolduc winning this primary?
It'll be viewed as legitimate because he's a Republican. The candidate at the top of the ticket will be a Republican. And it is only in very, very, very shocking and extreme circumstances that you would have someone go otherwise. I mean, I can only think of two really in my lifetime. One was when, and this is obviously a weird example, but when Rudy Giuliani endorsed Mario Cuomo in 1994 over George Pataki, and not only he was mayor, Pataki was running for governor against Mario Cuomo in New York, and in fact, Giuliani made the wrong bet. He bet on Cuomo, Pataki won, and their relationship was very fractious for many years. And the other example, I think, is David Duke. So David Duke ran for Senate in Louisiana, and the entire Republican Party, including the President of the United States, said you shouldn't vote for him, and he didn't win. So this is not a common thing to expect a politician from his own party leading the party to endorse the other party's candidate. It just never happens.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and we appreciate that. Those were two great examples. Eugene, let me turn to you. Let's just look at the bill for the total amount that Democratic groups have spent on behalf of far-right candidates. They've clocked in at $19 million, Eugene. We have been debating this throughout the primaries, whether it is morally something that can be defended. What do you make of that figure? What do you make of this strategy that they're continuing to do even in New Hampshire with this race?
Well, look, I think you can defend it morally. I'm not sure you can defend it politically or not. I mean, you know, there are people who are better at politics than me, people like Nancy Pelosi and others who have endorsed this strategy, and we'll see if it works out. I mean, I'm always in the be careful what you wish for camp. And if you bolster, you know, an election-denying far-right Trump candidate, that person might win the primary and might also win the general, and then you're stuck with this person. So I would do it very carefully. I have one other example to add to John's list, which is current. Larry Hogan, the outgoing Maryland governor, will not endorse the Republican candidate who was running for governor because he is a total wingnut Trumpist and predicts that the Democratic candidate will win.
John, let me let you jump in and ask you this question. Why do you think former President Trump didn't endorse in the New Hampshire race?
Well, I think he did endorse, didn't he? But he's sort of staying out. Am I misremembering? I mean, I think the idea maybe he signaled that he was a supporter of Bolduc's, but didn't go the whole way.
I think he signaled, but didn't go the whole way. Yeah.
Right. Well, I honestly don't know the answer to that question. My speculation would be that it's the race is of no interest to him for some reason or other. And also, you know, New Hampshire is a very weird state in this sense, which is that anything can happen here. Maggie Hassan won in 2016 by 1,000 vote margin. And so I really think if I were a Democrat, I'm neither a Democrat nor a Republican, but I'm a conservative. But I think it is profoundly immoral what Democrats are doing to bolster Bolduc, because if they actually hew to their principles that election denial is so terrible and everything like that, Bolduc can win. It's not like Maryland and Hogan, where it's extraordinarily unlikely that a successor candidate can win that race. I mean, Bolduc, you know, a big snowstorm. I mean, who knows? Something could happen. That is a very thin reed to lay your hopes on that that the state will turn away from an extremist like that.
And you're not alone. I mean, a number of Democrats with whom I've spoken have said they see this strategy as playing with fire for all the reasons you just talked about. Let's talk about what we saw today from President Biden, the fact, Eugene, that he is touting the Inflation Reduction Act. And here you have these new inflation numbers that really dashed the hope of a number of economists who were hoping they would go down instead of be ticking up. Does this come off as looking tone deaf? And do you think, to what I was just talking about with Attorney General Nessel, do you think inflation will still be the top issue, or do you think it will be issues like abortion that are starting to push through more forcefully and drive up turnout?
Well, I think it will be all of the above. I mean, I think abortion will drive up turnout, but I think inflation still is important. And this was not the timing the White House would have wanted to have what everyone agreed was not a good inflation number come out on the day that they're celebrating a piece of legislation called the Inflation Reduction Act. Now, there's lots of stuff in the legislation that they can and will, and I think should talk about that is popular. But when you call it the Inflation Reduction Act, people expected to have that effect. Now, the one asterisk to that analysis is that gas prices have continued to fall. And gas prices are clearly not the whole story of inflation. People are concerned about food and rent, and housing is up. A lot of things are up. The most visible and in many cases most immediate thing about inflation that people notice and see and experience is gas prices, and they've seen them come down for something like 13 weeks in a row, down to basically pre-pandemic levels or almost to pre-pandemic levels. So that helps blunt the impact again of a bad number.
I think go ahead, John.
No, I was going to say, I think that Biden and the Democrats are playing a bad hand about as well as you can play a bad hand with inflation. They got 2 months till the election. They're betting that either the American people will feel that inflation is kind of like a normal condition, it's an illness that the country has, but it's like chronic and ongoing, and they're not going to make a decision on it because otherwise, if they didn't run that way, I don't know what they would be running on in relation to this very central matter. Yeah, gas prices are down, but food prices are up 14.5% over last year, and food prices continue to rise. So on the one hand, the pump is okay. On the other hand, the grocery cart is bad. And of course, the less well off you are, the more inflation is a functional regressive tax that hits people, the poorer they are. And that's that is increasingly the Republican base. So you have people stimulated by abortion on one side, but this thing, it's just like a burr in the American saddle that isn't going to go anywhere. And you're going to get used to it, or it's going to make a huge difference.
Yeah, and food and housing driving those prices. All right, Eugene and John, great conversation. Thank you both so much. And I do want to turn now to some breaking news. Former federal judge, U.S. Solicitor General, and independent counsel Ken Starr has died at the age of 76. Starr was a judicial appointee by President Ronald Reagan and then served as Solicitor General under George H.W. Bush. He famously led the Whitewater investigation into former President Bill Clinton. His findings, called the Starr Report, then led to President Clinton's impeachment over his affair with Monica Lewinsky. According to a statement from his family, Starr died in Houston following complications from surgery. Still to come, who pays for the rising costs of climate change? It's often underserved communities that are hit the hardest. I will talk to an expert dubbed the father of environmental justice. That's next. Stay with us. Welcome back. The Environmental Protection Agency's Inspector General is launching an inquiry into Jackson, Mississippi's drinking water emergency after tens of thousands of residents were left without water when flooding caused failures at the city's water treatment plant. Water pressure in most of Jackson has since been restored, but a boil water notice still remains in place. In a Meet the Press exclusive interview, Chuck spoke to Vice President Harris about the crisis.
Here we are, the United States of America.
Yeah.
This is a capital city of one of our 50 states.
And it's tragic what's happening.
And there's no,
it's tragic.
Look, state, city, federal, everybody's let these people down, haven't they?
Well, I've talked to the mayor, Lumumba, and the president has talked to him, and we have the governor there has declared a state of emergency. FEMA is sending.
Well, everybody's trying now. But isn't that the frustration?
Well,
now.
However, it is a Jackson, Mississippi. That is an example of why we were pushing for the infrastructure law that now is the law of the land, so that we are sending billions of dollars to places like Jackson to upgrade what is a decaying infrastructure across our country. And so help is coming, because we actually came into office knowing that generations of leaders have been talking about fixing America's infrastructure and failed, and we actually got it done.
And as climate change creates more extreme weather that pushes crumbling infrastructure like water plants and sewer systems and power grids to their limit, crises like Jackson's raise new questions about environmental justice, where money to shore up infrastructure has and has not gone in the past, and where it is and is not going right now. Earlier this year, the mayor of Jackson called the state government's attitudes toward the city paternalistic and racist, noting Jackson was the only city that had to jump through oversight hoops for its infrastructure funding. Joining me now to discuss this critical topic is Robert Bullard, the founding director of the Bullard Center for Environmental and Climate Justice and professor of urban planning and environmental policy at Texas Southern University. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I think you heard Chuck really hit the heart of this when he said to the vice president, everyone's trying now that there's a crisis. But where was the trying? Where was the help? Where was the planning to prevent this crisis from happening? How did we get here?
Well, what we see in Jackson is a textbook case of a slow-moving disaster. A disaster that historically started when you started to see white flight leaving cities and the flight of dollars leaving cities, and as cities transitioned to becoming more and more black and poor, you started to get it more difficult to get monies from the state. So infrastructure has long been a major challenge, but when you involve race and politics, it becomes a much more challenging issue.
Well, and Director Bullard, Jackson is 83% black. How does that inform the lack of help that it has gotten over these many years to create the capacity for this to happen?
Well, if you look at the state of Mississippi, and it's graded a D- when it comes to infrastructure. The nation as a whole, as graded by the American Society of Civil Engineers, is given a grade of C-. So when you talk about water issues and infrastructure when it comes to schools, roads, bridges, dams, et cetera, when you look at that infrastructure and drill down to people of color communities and poor communities, it's not a C-, it's not a D-, it's an F. It's a failure. And that money actually means the difference between whether or not you have a system where people can get clean drinking water or whether or not you have to wait for that water, like in Jackson.
You heard the vice president say help is on the way. Mississippi slated to get about $430 million from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act to fix its water system. Jackson specifically got about $25 million from the American Rescue Plan. When you hear those numbers, big numbers, but is that enough? And clearly it's not coming soon enough. But do you think that will help deal with the root causes of this crisis?
It will help if, in fact, the money flow to need. And oftentimes when federal dollars go to states, in many cases where you have red states and blue cities, there oftentimes is a roadblock in getting that money to those cities, and particularly when those cities are predominantly black or a majority people of color. And so what we have advocated for many decades is for, whenever possible, federal dollars go directly to the cities and municipalities and the counties and bypass the state, because in many cases, states create artificial barriers and will not send that money to the cities that's needed. Jackson is that textbook example of that.
Well, that is such a critical point in terms of making sure that that money actually gets to the communities that are hurting. There's also obviously a social and systemic crisis that we are seeing play out here. How do you address that? That's not something that can be addressed with those dollars and cents from the government sending money. Well,
I think it's a infrastructure problem that is not just dealing with water issues. It's an infrastructure problem when we deal with schools, crumbling schools, infrastructure, crumbling roads and bridges, and looking at the idea of how can cities, counties, and municipalities and the state work together to ensure that that investments are used wisely, and that we don't leave communities on the other side of the road or on the other side of the levee, or leave them behind. And what has happened historically is that poor communities and communities of color have been left behind, and poor people pay taxes, and so they should have the same kinds of advantages of having clean water, clean air, safe schools, playgrounds, and all of that. But that's not the case.
Robert Bullard, thank you so very much for your perspective. And thank you for being with us this hour.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.